The first thing Lila noticed was how quiet the morning could be when nobody was yelling. It wasn't silent exactly. Cars whispered by somewhere in the distance. A bird made a small argument with another bird in the branches above her window. But it was quiet in the way that mattered. No slammed doors, no heavy footsteps thudding down the hall like a warning, no voice shouting her name in anger. The sun had barely lifted itself into the sky. Her bedroom looked the same as always. Pale walls, a dresser missing a handle, a stack of library books she had read through twice already. But something was different. Lila wasn't going to be here tonight. Her hands trembled as she stood in front of her backpack. It sat open on her bed like a mouth waiting to be filled. She had packed it carefully, quietly, over the last 2 days. A hoodie, a toothbrush, a tiny comb, 2 bottles of water, a change of clothes rolled as small as she could make it, a pair of socks, her school ID, a little notebook with the corners bent. And taped inside the cover of that notebook was a picture. Not of family, not of a birthday party, not of anything like that. It was an old printout from the mall photo booth. She and her bestie in 5th grade, faces pushed close together, both of them laughing. Lila had kept it because it proved something important. She used to laugh, and that mattered. Because lately, laughing felt like something that belonged to another girl entirely. Lila zipped the backpack closed, and for a moment she just stood there, holding on to the strap, like it might float away. Like she might float away with it. She reached into the drawer of her dresser and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a folded slip of paper and a crumpled pile of dollar bills and coins. Her meager savings. Birthday money, babysitting money, change she'd been careful not to spend. It wasn't much, enough to feel real, not enough to change her life. But she'd made a plan. She was going to get more today. Not stealing, not anything like that, just what belonged to her. Her parents didn't even know she had the account. Her grandmother had set it up years ago, back when people still pretended Lila was just shy instead of all the things she became after. Her grandmother had called it her someday account. Lila had always thought someday would be in the future, when she was older. But it turned out that someday was today. She slipped the envelope into her backpack and checked the clock. 5:12 a.m. If she was going to do this, it had to be now. There was a tightness in her chest that felt like a fist. She swallowed it down. She had swallowed worse. She eased her bedroom door open and listened. Nothing. The hallway carpet looked worn and tired. The house smelled like last night's dinner and stale alcohol. The walls held too many memories. She wasn't going to take any of them with her. She moved down the hall toward the front door, stepping lightly like she was learning how to become invisible. Her hand touched the doorknob. Cold metal. It clicked softly, and then the door opened. The morning air poured over her like a blessing. Cool, clean, free. Lila didn't look back. At the corner, 2 blocks away, Rowan was already waiting. He stood next to the bus stop sign, scanning the street with his eyes constantly. He wore a black hoodie and a backpack that looked twice as heavy as Lila's. His hair was messy like he hadn't slept. His hands were shoved into his pockets, and his shoulders were hunched as if he was trying to make himself as invisible as possible. When he saw her, his whole posture changed, like he'd been holding his breath and didn't even know it until he could finally exhale. "You came," he said. His voice was quiet. Lila tried to smile. It came out small and shaky. "You did too." Rowan nodded, but his eyes flicked past her shoulder, watching the street, watching the houses, waiting for something that might try to drag them back. Rowan's life looked different than Lila's from the outside. His house was bigger, louder. People came and went at odd hours. His parents acted like rules were for other families. There always seemed to be money around, but never the kind that went toward things like school clothes or doctor visits or normal dinners. Sometimes Lila would see Rowan at school and wonder if his life was easier, until she heard the stories he didn't want to tell. How his parents worked late, how there were strange adults in the living room at night, how Rowan learned not to ask questions because asking questions made people angry. How he was always walking a line between being invisible and being useful. Invisible was safer. Useful got you noticed. And being noticed in either of our houses was dangerous. Now he looked at her like she was the only steady thing left in the world. "You ready?" he asked. Lila gripped the strap of her backpack. "Yeah," she said quietly, and then with more resolve, "Yes." And then, in a moment that would stay in her memory like a marker dividing her life into before and after, Lila and Rowan stepped onto the bus together. The bus smelled like old seats and metal rails that had been touched by thousands of hands. Neither of them spoke much at first. It felt risky, like the universe might hear them and decide they didn't deserve this. Lila sat by the window. Rowan sat beside her, closer than he'd ever sat to anyone at school. His knees bumped hers every now and then when the bus hit a pothole. Each bump made her aware of how real this was. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't trapped. Not today. As the bus rolled toward the mall, Lila watched the neighborhood change. Houses became shops. Shops became parking lots. The streets widened. The sky seemed bigger. Rowan pulled out his phone and checked the time. 7:03 a.m. "You hungry?" he asked. Lila hesitated. Hunger was complicated. Sometimes she didn't feel it until she felt sick. Sometimes her body would demand food and then seem to punish her for wanting it. But here, on the bus, hunger felt normal. "A little," she admitted. Rowan nodded once like he understood things without needing the details. "We'll eat first," he said. "Like a real day." Lila looked at him. "A real day?" Rowan's mouth twitched. "Yeah, like kids." Lila swallowed hard. Like kids. When they reached the mall, the doors weren't even open yet. People gathered in clusters outside. Old men walking slowly for exercise, teenagers in groups pretending they weren't cold, a mom with a stroller. Rowan and Lila stood apart from all of them. They looked like everyone else. That was the strange part. From the outside, they could be any two friends meeting up early. No one could see the fear under their skin. No one could see the bruises in places their clothes covered. No one could see the way their childhood had been slipping through their fingers for years. At 10 o'clock a.m., the doors unlocked and everyone drifted in. Warm air hit Lila's face, and she almost cried. The mall was bright and clean and full of lights that didn't flicker angrily like the light bulb in the hallway at her home. Music played softly overhead, cheerful in a way that felt almost impossible. They walked slowly, not because they didn't know where to go, but because they didn't know what to do in a place that didn't make them be small and quiet. Rowan stopped outside a pretzel stand and stared at the menu like it was a foreign language. "You want one?" he asked. Lila looked at the pictures. "Those are huge." "So?" Rowan's eyes sparkled just slightly. "We're free today." The words landed inside her like warmth. Free today. Lila nodded. "Okay." Rowan ordered 2 pretzels, extra salt, and 2 lemonades. He paid in cash. His hands were steady like he had done this 100 times. They sat at a table and ate. The pretzel was warm and soft and salty, and for the first time in a long time, Lila ate without rushing, without flinching. Rowan looked around at people walking by. "Look," he said, nodding toward a group of kids laughing near the arcade entrance. "They don't even know." "Know what?" Lila asked. "That it's possible for a day like this to feel like this," Rowan said. Lila held her lemonade with both hands and didn't answer. She didn't trust herself to speak. After eating, Rowan led her toward the arcade like he had been pulled there by gravity. The arcade was loud and alive and flashing with neon. It smelled like popcorn and plastic toys and electricity. Rowan exchanged some cash for a cup of tokens and poured them into Lila's hands. "What? No, Rowan! Take them," he said. "I want you to play." "I don't even know what to play." Rowan grinned. "Then we figure it out." They started with racing games. Lila's hands were awkward on the steering wheel at first, but then she began laughing, an actual laugh, when Rowan's car spun out and crashed dramatically into a wall. "You're terrible at this," she teased. Rowan's eyes widened like he was offended. "I let you win." Lila laughed again, louder. Other kids looked over, but not in a mean way, just in a normal way, like laughter was something everyone deserved. They played basketball games, air hockey, and something that involved shooting plastic zombies with a fake gun. Rowan shouted victory like he was announcing a championship. Lila found herself smiling so much it made her cheeks hurt. At one point, she realized she had stopped watching the doors. She had stopped expecting someone to storm in, grab her by the arm, and drag her away. She had stopped waiting for the world to punish her for feeling happy. It didn't last forever, but it lasted long enough to matter. By afternoon, they sat on a bench near the mall fountain. The water sparkled under bright ceiling lights, rising and falling in little arcs like it was dancing for no one in particular. Rowan's energy had faded into something quieter. He held a paper bag with leftover fries and stared at the moving water. Lila sat next to him, hugging her backpack. "You still sure?" Rowan asked. Lila understood what he meant without him saying it. Still sure about leaving. Still sure about not going back. Still sure about the unknown. She looked at the fountain and made her answer steady. "Yes." Rowan nodded slowly. "Me too." Lila took a breath. "I'm going to the bank now." Rowan's head turned sharply. "You sure?" "I have to," she said. "Besides, it's mine." Rowan hesitated, then he stood. "I'm coming." The bank branch inside the mall looked too clean, too official. Lila felt like she didn't belong there, but she walked in anyway. A teller smiled at her. "Hi there," the woman said kindly. "How can I help you?" Lila's throat tightened. Rowan stood beside her like a shield, not blocking her, but reminding her she wasn't alone. Lila pulled out the bank book her grandmother had given her years ago, her account number, her name printed neatly. I need to withdraw $200, Lila said. The teller blinked once, then nodded. "Okay, do you have ID?" Lila pulled out her school ID with shaking hands. The teller took it, studied it, then typed into the computer. "All right, you'll need to enter your PIN here." Lila pressed the numbers slowly, praying she remembered right. She did. A minute later, the teller handed her 10 crisp $20 bills. Lila stared at the money like it was unreal. It wasn't riches, it wasn't safety forever, but it was money, money that could feed them for as long as they could make it last. When she walked out, Rowan looked at the bills. "You did it," he whispered. Lila nodded. "Yeah." Rowan exhaled through his nose like he had been holding that breath too. They spent the rest of the day doing what they'd always watched other kids do. They ate slices of pizza bigger than their hands. They shared a huge cinnamon roll that was way too sweet and still ate every bite. They sat in a bookstore and read funny quotes out loud, trying not to laugh too loudly and draw the wrong kind of attention. They tried on ridiculous sunglasses and took selfies with Rowan's phone. And for the first time in Lila's life, she experienced something she'd only seen in movies. She forgot. Not forever, but for moments at a time, she forgot fear. She forgot shame. She forgot the world could be cruel. She forgot the weight of every night she had survived. Rowan leaned close at one point and whispered, "We look normal." Lila laughed softly. We are normal. Rowan looked at her like she had just said something sacred. Yeah, he murmured. Yeah, we are. By evening, the mall began to empty. Store shutters rolled down, employees swept floors, lights dimmed slightly. Rowan and Lila stood outside near the bus stop again, backpacks on, money tucked carefully away. Rowan pointed toward the distant glow of a movie theater sign. They have walk-in movies, he said, where you can go in and out. Lila nodded. When she was very young, she'd been a couple times with her grandmother before she passed away. Let's go, Rowan said. They walked there under a sky turning purple and black, the air cooling around them. The theater lights looked like a promise. Inside, the smell of buttered popcorn hit them immediately. Rowan bought one with extra butter and one soda. They shared. Neither of them complained about the cost. Tonight was not about being careful. Tonight was about being alive. They slipped into a theater that was already playing a movie. The screen glowed bright and huge. It didn't matter what movie was on. It could have been about aliens, superheroes, talking animals. None of it mattered. In the dark theater, they sank into the seats. Lila felt herself exhale all the way down into her bones. For hours, they sat in that darkness with other people who didn't know them. The movie ended, another began. This was back in the day when 2 movies would play over and over, and you could just sit there all day watching the same 2 movies. They stayed as long as they could without being noticed, letting the theater swallow time. It was the safest place they'd ever been, not because it was perfect, but because it was public, bright, filled with strangers. No one could hurt them here without someone noticing. For the first time, Lila understood why people like crowds. It wasn't lonely, it was protection. At some point, Rowan whispered, "You falling asleep?" Lila's eyes were heavy. "No." Rowan looked at her. His face was soft in the light of the screen. He didn't look tough. He didn't look like the boy everyone assumed he was because of his parents. He looked 13. Just 13. "You ever think about what happens next?" Rowan asked. Lila swallowed. "All the time." Rowan's voice dipped lower. "I'm scared." Lila turned her head towards him. "Me too." Rowan stared at the screen, jaw tight. "But I'd rather be scared out here than—" He stopped. Lila finished for him quietly, "Then scared at home." Rowan nodded. Lila reached out carefully and touched his sleeve. Not holding his hand, not hugging, just touching enough to say, "I'm here." Rowan's shoulders loosened, and for a while they watched the movie like regular kids again. The theater finally began to empty into the deepest part of the night. Employees walked the aisles picking up trash. Lights began to rise slightly. People stretched and yawned. Rowan nudged Lila. "We have to go." Outside, the air was cold enough to bite. The streets were quiet now, almost too quiet. Rowan adjusted his backpack. "Park," he said. Lila nodded. They walked through sleeping neighborhoods under street lights that hummed above them. Lila's feet hurt, but she didn't complain. Every step away from that house felt like a step towards something she couldn't name yet. When they reached the park, it looked eerie in the dark. Swings moved slightly in the wind. Trees made shadows like long arms. The playground was empty. Rowan led her to the enclosed shelter near the picnic tables, a small structure meant for shade in the day. It had partial walls, a roof, and enough hidden corners to feel both safe and dangerous. Rowan checked around the shelter first, cautious. "No one," he whispered. Lila nodded. She pulled her hoodie tighter. Her body was exhausted, but her brain wouldn't turn off. It kept scanning the night for threats. They sat under the shelter, backs against the wall. Rowan pulled out a small blanket from his bag, a thin, faded thing that looked like it had once belonged to a younger sibling. "Here," he said, draping it over both of them. Lila hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. For a few minutes they didn't talk. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Lila stared into the darkness beyond the shelter and thought about all the nights she'd stared into darkness before. Only those nights had been filled with dread. This dread was different. This dread had open air, had stars, had choices. Rowan's voice came quietly. "You think anyone's looking for us?" Lila's stomach twisted. She didn't want to answer. She forced herself anyway. "Probably," she said. Rowan was silent. Lila swallowed hard. "But if they're looking, that means people might also help." Rowan's head turned slightly. "Help us?" Lila nodded. "Maybe." Rowan exhaled slowly, like the idea hurt and comforted him at the same time. "You think we should tell someone?" he said. Lila stared out at the park. "Not tonight." Rowan nodded. "Okay." After a pause, he whispered, "Thank you." Lila's throat tightened. "For what?" Rowan's voice shook just a little. "For coming, for not leaving me there alone." Lila closed her eyes. She thought about her bedroom, the hallway, the front door, the fear. And she thought about Rowan at the bus stop this morning, standing like a statue, trying not to break. "I couldn't leave you there," she whispered. Rowan leaned his head back against the wall. "Yeah, me neither." They slept in pieces. Lila would drift off, then wake suddenly, heart racing, convinced she had heard footsteps. Rowan stayed half awake too, scanning the shadows. But eventually exhaustion won. Their bodies couldn't keep fighting the need for rest. In the middle of the night, Lila woke again. This time, Rowan was asleep. His face, younger, without worry, tugging at it. For a second, Lila saw what he might have been in another life. Just a kid who loved video games and annoying jokes and sleeping in on weekends. Lila hugged her knees and stared at the faint outline of the park. She was afraid. But underneath that fear was something new. Something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope. Not big hope. Not everything will be perfect hope. Just hope enough to keep breathing. Just hope enough to keep walking. Just hope enough to believe that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning. She whispered into the darkness, almost like a promise. "We'll figure it out." The wind moved through the trees like it was listening. Check this channel for the exciting conclusion of The First Day Free.